As we conclude the largest anti-racist conference of all time, we have a surprising guest that would like to make a statement to us about his struggle to come to terms with tolerance and diversity.
Things went back in the 1930s. I have been in Argentina thinking things over, and I should have done things differently. These days I am a changed man, and this is the dawning of a new day. I am now an avowed anti-racist, and we are going to crush racism once and for all.
This is amazing. I can see the headlines now. Adolf Hitler is an anti-racist. This could end racism for good.
Welcome again to American Zarathustra. This is episode 49, and we are super happy to have with us today host of White Rabbit Radio, Tim Murdock. How are you today, Tim?
I'm fantastic. How are you, gentlemen?
I'm doing good. Sorry for I guess we had a little buffering issue there for a second, but we are on. So let's welcome back again my friend and co-host, Nullis. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Hello, Donald. Hello, Tim. And hello to the audience.
Brilliant. So, Tim, we are so happy to have you. We've been chatting a little bit backstage. There's quite a lot to cover here. We'd like you to just sort of start off by, describing who you are, what you do, White Rabbit Radio. Give a basic introduction for the audience, for people who don't know you.
Well, White Rabbit Radio was a ham radio call name used by either Bob Whitaker or one of his associates, or both, way back in the day. They were ham radio operators, and that was the web applet or whatever it was that brought out the first podcast. And my name is Tim Murdock, and of course I own White Rabbit Radio these days, but that's where the name comes from. And the first podcast I was asked to do was completely anonymous in 2009. And I was asked to do something out of the box for Whitaker to help get out. What he wanted to do was start what you guys think of as meme wars, which was custom designed for the computers. And what he wrote was political slogans. And he specialized in writing them during the Cold War, propaganda, if you will. And he was the one behind anti-racism as a code word for anti-white, and diversity as a code word for white genocide. And he wanted these associations out there broadly. Wow. That's the whole idea of using memes. And so we started way back years prior to that, we started posting, me and a half dozen others posting what was called the white genocide mantra at the time, far and wide on the internet, testing it out as he was writing it, which basically teased out several memes. And in 2009, it wasn't where he wanted it to be. And so he was looking for other forms of media, and I was okay speaking in public and stuff like that. So it was like, you do a podcast. And I said, sure, I'll try it. It's going to be completely anonymous. They wanted samizdat. That was what he was used to from the Soviet Union days. Samizdat, of course, means anonymous in Russian.
Okay.
And I did the wave files. I told him it's going to be crazy. It's not going to be like anything these white nationalists have ever heard before. It's not going to be anything typical, because that audience won't do what you want them to do. You have to go after another audience, which is alt news, which actually, Stormfront, Whitaker site, UFO sites, they're all in something called alt news because we're outside the mainstream.
Right.
So I'm like, you got to go for the larger alt news audience that is maybe surfing something like Stormfront, but not necessarily reading, not necessarily logging in, because the vast majority of people that read forums like Stormfront never log in anyways. And so you're going to have to go for something out of the box. You're going to have to go for people that spread these particular messages. And the models we had were like global warming as a hoax. How was that spread outside the mainstream? Well, that was spread through alt news. it was spread through conspiracy sites like wildfire. Most people have heard of it. Global warming is a hoax, but most people don't know that that was a meme that someone spent a lot of money to spread, that most of the major networks wouldn't accept. So they just went into the alt news, into the radio crowd, and failed actually until the internet got going. And then it was spread wildly through your classic conspiracy sites like Alex Jones and whatnot, even before him, Brents.com. And so that's what I did. I designed the podcast around maybe what those people might want to listen to, or from a frame that they might want to listen to, having never designed a podcast before. And I laid it out in WAV files, and then it was compressed by a third party and then put up on this fourth party web applet called White Rabbit Radio. And since they were putting it up on White Rabbit Radio, I said, okay, I'll call it Horus the Avenger's Follow the White Rabbit, because I was reading Manetho on the Hyksos at the time. And it was like, well, you'd have to read it to understand. There were, it was this episode in ancient Egypt where they resurrected their mythology to where Horus the Avenger was kicking the shit out of, I guess you could say, the red hippopotamus, and they resurrected that to kick the Hyksos out of their country. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, and so I tagged the name on that and put it out, and it absolutely positively went crazy. It was like wildfire. I told him I'd do 6, and then after 6, we did like every 4 weeks we'd put one out, and the message just started. The group started mushrooming. He wanted 300 posting the mantra around on the internet, because that's what he thought it would take. Like, for the word anti-white to go mainstream again, for you're going to have to use anti-racist. We're basically fulfilling a need. What do you say when you're called a racist? You're just saying that because I'm white. Anti-racism is just a code word for anti-white. Right. The idea of doing that is to get to a point where you can just call people anti-white like they're calling you racist. And unless you're counteracting that, you're not going anywhere from a messaging level. And if you don't have messaging, you're not going anywhere anyways. Let
me quickly share my little trick is that when someone calls me a racist, I correct them. I say, no, I'm a race realist. And that comes, I think, from Amaran, Jared Taylor. I don't know where I got that from, but
we found that stuff doesn't work. That doesn't work in mass messaging.
Oh, okay. It's worked well for me in these little private conversations.
I mean, I will tell you right now, you can do anything and make it work. But in 2009, 2006, none of that stuff worked. Oh, yeah. None of that stuff worked. Nowadays, you can pretty much. Nowadays, I mean, this is the average email I get. Someone in Europe's talking to a relative of theirs in another part of Europe, and they're talking about what's going on in South Africa, and the listener of mine says, you know what that's about? And the person say, yeah, they're trying to genocide the whites. And the other person adds, yeah, white genocide is real, and that's what they're doing to us here. But at the time, this type of thing would have been unthinkable. You really have to work into that. What I would encourage you to do is try something else. Before you say, instead of just, I'm not going to tell you what to say, because I know that doesn't really work. I've never told the pro-whites what to say. They just don't listen historically. And it's not being rude. They're just very independent. Yeah. But what I would say first is, well, you're speaking from the anti-white point of view, or that's typical of the anti-white narrative or anti-white perspective. So in a very polite way, you're calling them anti-white, but you're doing it politely where they can really think about it. And then you just say, I'm more of a race realist. You understand the difference? Where you can transition their thinking. Right. What you're doing is stigmatizing their thinking as anti-white, which is what it is. And you're doing something very useful to Western civilization at the same time. So I'm not going to take away from what you're doing, because you can do anything right now and it works. I just know what has historically, if we would have done that in 2006, it didn't test out, doesn't work. None of that stuff does. You want to say, I always do one simple trick right now. I always say, well, from the anti-white point of view, or you're speaking from the anti-white point of view, or that's typical of the anti-white position. I'm more of a race realist, or I always say I'm just pro-white.
I like that. That sort of tagline, that's typical of the anti-white person, et cetera. That works really nicely. And it segues, but anyway, yeah. So
it's not, at a dinner table at holidays, you don't want to tee off on someone and start calling them anti-white, but yet you can low key troll them into silence right now. And that's something I would encourage you to do. use it enough. A lot of times on our side, because we hear something all the time, we think that everyone else is hearing it all the time. Well, not quite yet. We're just working to that point, you know. It's kind of like you're working at Wendy's and they roll out the famous advertising, and the reason it's famous is because it demands an explanation. You see, most of Whitaker's messaging historically demands an explanation. So a lot of people think that's ineffective advertising. Well, if you're Wendy's and you're advertising against, have it your way, Burger King, or one of the McDonald's slogans, well, you're going to have to think out of the box if you're going to make a run at that, right? So what they did was they said, "Where's the beef?" Now, where's the beef? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
No, it was a commercial, and it's not like, well, that immediately jumps out that you should eat at Wendy's, but it was a very radical form of messaging.
Sure.
That was a curveball that helped that brand explode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people working at Wendy's probably got tired of hearing it, but it paid all their bills.
Right.
I would add to this simply that in 2009, I remember very well, my European friends, many people in the audience know my background is Hungarian, so that I have quite a few friends in Hungary and other parts of Europe. And back then in 2009, the concept of being white was a very foreign concept to them. Even to this day, there's still debates and arguments about what this means in Europe and how this is understood. But what I am noticing is that this concept is beginning to seep into the European nationalist sphere, but it's taking time. And so the messaging is much different in Europe than it is over here in the United States. So I just wanted to add to that, this is not a simple, slogan that you just throw out there, because you're really trying to unite a lot of different people of many divergent backgrounds and ideas and understandings of identity.
Well, actually, no, what we're trying to do is undermine the framework and the narrative in America, because once the Soviet Union ended, all the satellites ended as well. So if let's say the white genocide policies of America ends, well, it's like the Soviet Union. You got to control the world or you're over with. Well, and it's a classic closed system. So what we're doing is targeting things in America and the English-speaking world. However, I will tell you the first translation for Bob Whitaker's mantra was in Hungary, and there was a lot of Hungarian nationalists that latched onto white genocide even at the top, which is kind of interesting in itself. But yeah, that's one of the problems with Europe. That problem has been solved. That challenge has been solved of who's white, what's white, with the effective open borders. It's like America. America is kind of a tricky place in so much as, at one time in America, you would be Irish or you would be Anglo-Saxon, a WASP or something like that. But what happens when you flood an area, we've seen this in the UK, we see this in Germany, we see this in anywhere you flood with non-Europeans, and then you have otherwise European ethnicities, you'll find that nationalism becomes like a hyper-nationalism all of a sudden. People realize that, well, you're basically no longer being attacked in the south side of Chicago for being Irish. Now you're being attacked for being white. Yeah. And so that's what's going on in Europe. It's this Americanization, which I don't like, but in the end, it's going to end up uniting all of everyone that descends from Europe.
The Imperium. Yeah, that's powerful stuff. There's a million tangents that we could easily go on, and I actually want to go on all of them. But I do want to focus on the things that you've done, your show, your history, and then obviously tie that into the question of how do the arts function in our movement. So I know you've been, what you said, like involved in this since 2009. And now you've got White Rabbit Radio. Maybe we can segue right into your animation.
I've been involved publicly since 2009. I started reading the online forums even before the internet, 95. Then I got involved with Whitaker and reading his stuff in 2000. He was someone that I figured knows enough about the enemy that I would do something for, and we were trolling online. It was absolutely hilarious. It was kind of like, just one of those things where you contributed to a site, but I never really contributed anything. I just read and started talking to this guy that worked on Capitol Hill, and he was extremely intelligent at messaging and why, white nationalism failed and why it was failing and what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong,
So let's talk a little bit about your animation. How did you get into animation? What's your process? I know you write and you hire artists. Maybe you can kind of give us an overview. Have you ever talked about your animation in an art context before?
No, not much. Not much. Most people don't know enough to ask questions.
Yeah.
Well, animation, it's kind of interesting because there's been an evolution since the first one and the last one I worked on. The first animation we did, we were working on all these different things. And at the time, Bob's Underground Graduate Seminar, Bugs as it was called, Bob's group, my writing comrade, Adelheim, is from Europe. So the half the group was European, half here. And a lot of them didn't, are completely anonymous and always have been and always will be because of the default. And so my first experience was because the podcast itself was so out of the box. What I had done was I had crossed a concept in the back of my head for a child's cartoon with a very radical concept like white rabbit genocide. And so instead of talking about it directly, I talked about it in allegorical terms, which got on a lot of like pro-whites nerves, but it was effective in getting out the message that Whitaker wanted out, which is all I really cared about. I didn't think I'd ever meet those guys or they ever know who I was, or nor did I care. So I'm just like thinking out of the box. And Charles Kraft was a friend of mine, and he went along these lines as well. And of course, this theme stays up through the animations. Is you'll take a piece of programming that people expect to go a certain way, and you slam it into their heads from another direction. You don't fight the $1 trillion in programming. You use it. It's like a jujitsu move. Use the weight of your opponent against him. And this is something that I started specializing in, I guess, inadvertently. But Charles Kraft, he would disarm these really aggressive images. And one of the ways he disarmed these aggressive images was he would put Hitler's head on a teapot. This type of thing. Charles Kraft, who died, and he was a legend. My last art project, one of my biggest ones, was with him that didn't get finished. It was a white disasterware plate, for white genocide. But interesting enough, this theme also kept up through animations. And so with How Whites Took Over America, you had a stereotype, and it's very ingrained, but, most of the associations are now breaking down. And they're breaking down because of a basic. It takes 15 to 20 years to brainwash a nation, because that's how long it takes to put a group of human beings underneath a particular media, one media, one generation under one media. It takes 15 to 20 years under a new media to break that down, or under something more radical, a new form of communication. So if you really look at the internet from 95 into where we are now, you understand that the breakdown is just accelerating at rapid speeds. Most of the associations are right there. So Whitaker's using these basics like he taught me, and they're trying to front run these windows using memes to try to aggressively start moving things in a direction we want it to go. And what I noticed was these associations that most people have, and my target audience is pretty much white or the enemy. These associations, they've built up trillions of dollars. Evil white people killed the Indians. And so in the first one, we're like, you know what? I'm going to give you that. They're just not going to do it the way you think. They wiped them out with diversity. You didn't see really too much violence or anything else. It was just, and it was like huge.
Wow. How
Whites Took Over America came out, and you can still see it up on YouTube. It's never been taken down on YouTube. It's never been striked. AntiRacist Hitler was never that's the one I'm most famous for. That was never given a strike, but that one did cause a lot of problems. But anyhow, and they ended up taking that down at 600,000 views. But that How Whites Took Over America came out first. And I realized that bringing one of these out, it was like 200,000 views, and it took down the YouTube channel it was on. The person I had tasked with putting up on a YouTube made a couple fatal mistakes on how they put it up. And they were using a VPN at the time, one of the a VPN before it was time. And I should have had it myself on a channel. So they ended up coming down, and we ended up putting it back up on White Rabbit Radio, something or other. And it came down for a comment reason. So this is like the third channel it was up on, I believe.
Wow.
How Whites Took Over America, part 1. But then we figured out the YouTube game. You either got to moderate comments or turn them all off, because you couldn't moderate comments. And then we started saying, Jesus, this is an effective way to get out a message. We want to get out message that diversity is a genocidal scam, and this is very effective. By 2011, words like anti-racist is a code word for anti-white, and anti-white was being used in the media more and more and more and more and more. You would show up to I would show up to a CNN article on immigration, and our group would just have the comment section scorched with the mantra and stuff like that. So I don't even know who these people were. Wow. So we were beyond anything else. So we were kind of looking to move into other medias, and animation became natural because we had enough voiceovers within the group. And one of the particular group members knew a crude form of animation. While he was a great director, Mott the White Rabbit is a great director from Northern Europe. One of the challenges was he wasn't necessarily the greatest animator. He wasn't really confident in his animation abilities. He did How Whites Took Over America Part 1. Okay. But the second one we decided to do was Adelheim, my writing partner, had a short story about how Hitler became an anti-racist. And so we started fooling around with that, and we started redoing that into a script that was going to be just wild over the top, where Hitler migrates to Argentina. And of course, I had him coming out of De Glocka as a time machine. He comes right from Argentina to Israel, and he totally annihilates the Jewish people with diversity. And this whole entire concept, all the lines you hear are lines that normally you would hear, and the consequences are the same. You know, he's wiping them out. There's no violence in it at all. It's everything's going to be exactly what they show us. Look at all these wonderful restaurants you have to eat at.
It's literally putting the shoe on the other foot. It's amazing to hear the Jews in the cartoon say the things that whites say. You know, and about, you know, you're erasing. You guys want to hear the funniest thing about anti-racist Hitler that no one knows? To get a pro-white at the time to do a Jewish voiceover was so damn easy. But it literally took 3 months of auditions to find someone pro-white that could do the stereotypical Hitler. I was wondering about that. I really like that voice. There's just, I mean,
well, it's Hollywood. Hitler didn't speak English, so this is Hollywood Hitler we're giving them, and that's what you have to do. You have to do that for an English-speaking audience, of course, right? So you don't really racism
once and for all. Yeah,
you've got to think about that. You're doing a Hollywood Hitler that because Hitler never spoke English. So you're kind of doing this type of thing, we're like, you've got to take the programming, because people assume that Hitler, you know, wiped out the Jews and all that kind of stuff. This is $1 trillion worth of programming. I'm not fighting that. I'm just going to slam your head into the pavement.
Well, I want to offer my voice acting skills to you and for your future animations. So that's just making that official. But yeah, it's just so well done, and then there's a lot of things about film and animation is it's not just storytelling. There's things that you see happening in the background. Like throughout the story, there's a police officer chasing an African migrant with a knife or something.
The Easter eggs. Easter eggs.
Yes. Yeah.
You see did you notice any other little characters?
Yeah, there was one. I think it was meant to be you or something from the back. Yeah, I caught that. I kind of keep my eye open for those things.
That was meant to be Adelheim, actually, but that's another story. Yeah, it's meant to be one of the writers. Have you seen him?
Here's another thing. You actually use quotes. I can't remember the woman's name off the top of my head.
Barbara Lerner Specter. She was big in the pro-white scene at the time, and everything she said, she's basically admitting to white genocide in Europe.
Literally, she's like, it's going to take time for whites to adjust. There's going to be a lot of anti-Semitism, but Jews will be taking a role in destroying Europe, you know. And in the way that she says it's psychopathic, it's disgusting and disturbing.
Sure.
But the way that you took that and recontextualize it, only people like us who are in our sphere, who are, you know, kind of knowledgeable enough about this content would catch those things. But it's a really nice layer of Easter egg, if you will. I just want to tip my hat.
Yeah, that was the big challenge at the time. The pro-whites wanted me to put all these references to her and 50-point plans to her, and have videos of her. There was all these splits of her, you know, at the end. And I said, you guys can do whatever you want to. Just make sure you give the artists and stuff and the credit. Just make sure you roll the credits after that. But, you know, that stuff that you guys are doing isn't going to work. It's standalone. You know, I'm not messing with it. It is what it is. It is what I do is propaganda. It's just I create associations that exist in the real world and not the enemy's propaganda, which, you know, is creating associations that don't exist in the real world.
Right. Naturally. You have a template here for so much more. I mean, there are so many other anti-whites that are the architects of white genocide, and they have all their plans. You could do Saul Alinsky, the Frankfurt School. I mean, there's just so many different characters that are, our enemies. They basically hate us and want us to be erased from Earth. So, taking these kinds of ironic situations, maybe, I don't know, have you ever thought about doing Anti-Racist Hitler 2, 3, 4, and 5?
Well, the challenge with the pipeline is the director and the artist for the first one. Okay, I was just one of the writers, maybe one of the main writers, but coming up with the different ideals and some of the visuals. But as a director, he was amazing, but he wasn't really comfortable with the animation. So what we did was we came in with my artist. Now, my podcast inspired art from day one, and my artist is a heavy hitter. And he came in and did all the character designs and everything else. And so they're like, why don't you get Jay in here, and why don't you get him in here to do keyframes for me? And so he can draw out keyframes. And he said, sure, I'll draw out keyframes and we'll just get it done, because the pipeline, and this was the second pipeline, was becoming super convoluted. We were trying to use Autodesk Maya, and that wasn't going to work. We were trying to do things that just weren't going to work, but at the same time, we're going to make it extremely professional. And so that's what we wanted. We wanted to, like every animation that I do, I try to increase the production quality, either use a better animator or a better artist, something like that. So Anti-Racist Hitler, he wanted more of a, when it comes to the classic keyframes, he wanted the classic Disney style moves. And you see that in Anti-Racist Hitler. And that's my artist doing keyframe by keyframe, and he's animating them after the fact. And so that's one of the things we did. And also, I mean, everyone's pitching in to get this thing done. I was actually animating some street scenes, which is crazy because I'm not an animator. His process, he's an underground animator from Northern Europe, and a lot of people from that area have seen his work. But one of the challenges with Mott the White Rabbit is one of the challenges is his actual creation process. His pipeline is extremely convoluted and crazy for other animators or artists or anything else. So it's kind of funny. But it works when it's just a couple people. And that's the challenge for someone like me that's basically a project manager, and I can write dozens of scripts. The challenge is understanding, because I'd never done animations before, the different pipelines, the different types of animations, and what's best. Now, Murdock, they do something very clever in so much as that you got three people doing the voiceovers. Their pipeline is relatively simple. It's like a Yellow Submarine style animation that's very easy for them to do. It's going to be time consuming no matter what you do animation style. But at the same time, it's not like Disney. It's not, you're not dealing with $1,000 a minute animation or $1,500 a minute animation, something like that. But it's something they can do and produce a lot of. And they've kind of like become the historians of the alt-right doing that type of thing. But that's something I never did. We're doing these more elaborate pipelines and stuff like that.
So tell us about your other animation projects then.
Let's see. How Whites Took Over America Part 2 is something that I wanted to come out. I'd written the script for it. We'd written the script for it. We dialed it down, and I wanted to experiment with a totally different model. Instead, it was taking too long for these groups of dissidents to get together to do these projects. But at the same time, getting voiceovers was relatively straightforward. So I wanted to experiment with hiring various different animators that I could get to work for me anonymously. And so that's how that worked out. Basically, How Whites Took Over America Part 2, it was just the first deal of me going out and just hiring an animator, keeping them anonymous, and just producing the work. And that process actually worked quite good. I used that same process to produce an animation for the British National Party for one of their elections. Wow. I had other European national parties that wanted me to produce stuff for them as well. It's just they didn't want to. The problem is that when you're doing animations, you're dealing with $1,000 a minute unless you want it fast. If you want it fast, it can go up from there. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's just like that was the basics at the time. The animator that worked on that, some of his animation projects were maybe $8,000 a minute. They're all hand tooled. You can get some ridiculous stuff with animation, depending on what you're looking for or what you're trying to do. And that was the second one, which I'm like, you know what? If I had enough money, I could just produce dozens and dozens of these. because I could easily have 3 or 4 animators working at the same time. But again, you're dealing with a huge cost because they're going to get a good animator is going to get the going rate, and the going rate at the time was $1,000 a minute. It may be a little higher, maybe a little lower now, depending on what you're looking for. And then, of course, we went into there was another 3D animator that really wanted to work on stuff, and I had him design the White Rabbits, and that's something that came out, which is a child's cartoon. Actually, you can see those rabbits on the YouTube channel, which was that was kind of an interesting experiment in 3D. I don't like 3D animation, but I thought it would be good for a children's cartoon because you can make things so exquisitely beautiful. You know, one of the challenges with 3D animation at the time was you needed a render farm to run these little guys. So that was one of the challenges, and designing the fur and that whole entire process. And that was someone that had designed 3D stuff that probably everyone listening had seen.
Yeah.
And so someone of extreme talent. So that was something we did that was like going on the side. And there was other projects as well. Johnny Racist is something that I wanted to do like long term, this dystopia, this particular Gulag State University and the USSA.
Yeah.
And I wanted to work long term at undermining concepts like white supremacism and neon Nazis and that type of thing. Yeah. The whole entire concept of them calling us these simple names, you know, you're breaking down word racism, you're breaking down everything else. We're going to finish it with Johnny Racist. And that I did, the first episode went quite well. And then that animator fell through, but got me even better animator on the second one. And that one we're using a totally different process, which I became very comfortable with, a totally different piece of software. And it was very professional pipeline when I learned how to run them, from storyboard to voiceovers and everything else. And I was really, really happy with that. Unfortunately, the mistake I made with the Johnny Racist is not doing a complete story at first. And the reason I didn't do that is because I couldn't afford, I didn't have the extra 10 grand for the 10 minutes, you know? But my goal was to have 30 minutes of animation and then build up to an hour. So I have 30 minutes of animation, but anyhow, on Johnny Racist Part 2, I was pretty much more happy with that from a production quality than anything else, because you could do dozens of, I mean, that's something I could put on TV easily and do a lot of things with that particular environment and the characters and the university system and the whole entire dynamics. But at the same time, it came down to money and keep producing them. Basically, you need a lot of money to keep producing them. You need basically $1,000 a week to pay an animator to create a minutes of animation. Basically,
sure. Who's your target audience with these animations?
Oh man, I would say anyone white and normal. I have a broad target. I don't have, the first podcast was just for an alt news listener. Maybe they're going to Alex Jones and going to Stormfront, then yawning over race realism or something. Okay, that's fine. With the animations, it's, you know, I'm pretty comfortable. You could play them on CNN or Fox News or Adult Swim. You're going to get a freaking reaction out of a lot of the audience. Okay. I'm pretty convinced of that. And that's what I'm going for.
Adult Swim would be. Have you tried sending it out or?
Well, I was invited to a film festival over AntiRacist Hitler. My mother was dying from Parkinson's at the time, and I could not go. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I did the podcast to begin with. I was actually had moved out of Illinois, was back in Michigan trying to figure out what was going on with my mom and stuff like that. That's when she first came down with Parkinson's. That's one of the only reasons I pretty much got involved with anything like that. Is, well, for one, it was anonymous. Two, I had a little bit extra time because I was dealing with life issues.
Wow, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. Because I feel like there's a process with art. You have the production stage, the publishing, and then of course the marketing, and oftentimes sales, depending on if you're like for a freelancer like myself. So here you've got a lot of work done. You've invested huge amounts of money and time, effort. You've got teams of people. So what's next? How can you take your animation to the next level?
Well, we only have 3 goals at White Rabbit Radio. First was to seed anti-racist as a code word for anti-white, reseed the word anti-white. That's done. That was done in my opinion, 2011. That phrase was out there. Anti-white is mainstream now. It's used all over the place, whether they like it or not. It's going to have to be used more and more. I
think we have to give Jason Kuna a huge round of applause too. I think he's had an enormous impact on mainstreaming the term anti-white. It's hard to trace all these things back to their origin, but it's just good to get any of all our words out and our dialectic out. That's why I tell people about using, say, terms like, race realist or a counter-Semitic rather than anti-Semitic, or, just something that puts you, like, it takes you off the hot seat and it gives you leverage in a conversation. I feel commonly you're not going to change the mind of the person attacking you, but you're having an impact on the people who are watching, because there's oftentimes these are social media debates, and people are.
Yeah, I remember like yesterday hearing Jason on Red Ice, and he was going at it, anti-white this, anti-white that, and I immediately had him on as soon as I could. As soon as I get a hold of him, as soon as I started doing interviews. Yeah, he's pioneering white self-help with his Going Free. And he's using the term in that particular phrase. We never really thought of white self-help, and that's not something I'd be geared for necessarily, but he is perfectly geared for it and doing a tremendous job. Indeed. And if you're helping people call the enemy anti-white, yeah, you're going to help mainstream things.
Well, I try to introduce his dialectic through my songs, and I'm encouraging other musicians you weren't, one of my songs, I say, you weren't born guilty, and there's other words or other phrases that Jason's known for that I weave into my songs, because I feel that would be a really great way to Trojan horse these ideas into pop culture too. We're not born guilty, etc. So that's just one idea. But so do you think you might have another shot at, maybe getting your animation onto, say, Adult Swim or someplace like that?
Oh, I'm sure someday they'll be played somewhere. Someday I may produce dozens and dozens of Johnny Racists or who knows what more. It came down to a question of, do I want to spend this $4,000 on animation, or do I need to go into video? And at the time I needed to go into video. And so it was just an allocation of resources, because if you're not in video now, you got problems. So I had to take my podcast to more video. That requires, I don't have unlimited funding, obviously. We do have a paywall, which is something I've always done. There was always a big demand over my take on the news, guys going to work, whatnot, get my take on the news, various different geopolitical news from a exclusive white perspective, I guess you could say, pro-white perspective. So that is something that was in demand, and I've never been good at asking for money, but I did put up a small paywall in 2011, 2012, and that's really what paid for everything. Awesome. Because you have to figure out a way to support your particular project. At the time, there was no such thing as, you're just going to stream to YouTube or you're going to have a Spotify. None of that stuff existed. And if it did exist, we'd just be kicked off of it. But I remember I put a, what is the big podcasting site? I started putting a podcast up on SoundCloud. Is it SoundCloud?
It's slipping my mind right now, but I know there is one that's like the major one.
Yeah, there was one. Yeah, SoundCloud. SoundCloud was the big deal, and I put a podcast because for me it's free bandwidth. Because our podcast, we're doing terabytes and terabytes. I would put out an episode of This Week in White Genocide, and Daily Stormer carried it on the front, TRS carried it on the front, and we would go 90,000 downloads on Mixcloud. It was just silly at the time, the podcasting. So I started putting it up on SoundCloud. And it would just, because to me, it's free bandwidth. Typically, prior to like the SoundCloud and the Mixcloud, I got kicked off all those. But typically, prior to that, you'd have to run a site and you'd have to put things on the site and you'd have to host things from your site. And of course, the big expense is bandwidth. And bandwidth was always expensive. And so these guys are talking, they're not counting on someone getting those type of downloads on SoundCloud or something like that of a 2-hour podcast, but we could.
It's a good moment to stop and talk to the audience and explain how important their role is in supporting all of us content creators. Your show produces incredible content. It's definitely an excellent show, and I'm strongly recommending people to regularly visit your show, but then to help you out, because you're producing culture, and that's what we do in the White Art Collective. We're producing culture that is meant to change culture, is meant to save our culture, and in a sense, we are cultural engineers. So you're well into that, and our circles have to cross over. So quite happy that you had Hireth on your show recently. Quite happy that our circles are connecting, and we're all, there's power in numbers. We're growing, I think, exponentially. And I feel like I probably should give the mic to Nullis just for a second there. I haven't had a chance to see if he wants to chime in a little bit.
Well, I just wanted to throw in maybe one or two thoughts. First of all, Tim, I just wanted to say that you're an example and a testament to commitment and perseverance for all of us. I think that you were around for quite a while. You were in the age where technology was just starting out. So, everybody today is in comparison to the early 2000s. There was very limited availability of spreading a message back then as opposed to today. And I think that you're that testament to show that if you stick it out, if you're committed to it, if you persevere and don't give up, then you can successfully share a message with the broader audience. And I think this is an important message for all of us, a very positive message for all of us. I just wanted to add, and speaking of like the last 5 years, give or take, and you seem to have a very targeted messaging, which is very good. I think that that's an important thing to focus. For me, a big theme is always to stay on message. I see a lot of times, people are just going to jump around on various themes and this topic today, that topic tomorrow, arguing about this, arguing about that. And I see what you do, to me, is exactly what we should be doing, is to stay on message, continue that message, and be unapologetic about it. But I am curious, though, in the past 5 years, give or take, there was a very strong growth of the meme concept, of the meme wars, if you will. How has that influenced you or changed your messaging, or maybe adjusted your messaging, if at all, over the past, let's say, 5 or 6 years?
Well, there was more of them. I think it's like whitegenocide.info has a whole bunch of them. They're always bringing out new stuff, like diversity is chasing down the last white person. But we keep it relatively simple. The ideal of these particular types of memes are actually, or types of political slogans, is to get concepts into people's heads. Once those concepts are into people's heads, they become weapons to use in the public space. What I mean by that, the ideal of anti-racism as a code word for anti-white is for a white kid to walk in and just basically polarize a room by calling them anti-white over some particular anti-white concept they're doing. And for us to do that, because what's going on, of course, is the direct opposite most of our lives. Someone walks in the room and yells racism, right? And so we want to counteract that. And so typically, the only downside to the meme culture and that particular generation, the millennials and what's after Generation Z, the challenge is they have a very short attention span. Exactly. And they have a super short attention span that's brought by technology. So they can't stay with concepts very long at all. And you just can't, but the thing is, if you keep hitting them with things over and over again, they'll come around to it. They can't escape it, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like they want to jump to this meme or this ideal or that ideal or that ideal. There's like 1,000. They want to play a new video game every day. So I don't know. It hasn't changed anything other than if you're committed and you bear down in your messaging, you can become more effective because you really don't have any competition. If someone's off on, it's like a hot knife through butter. If you don't have a message and I have a message, you're done. If your message is, I'm not a racist, and my message is you're a racist, you're done. You're over with. And if you don't have a message, you're also over with. But if your message is 1,000 different messages, well, then I'm still going to win because I'm staying focused on this particular message. And that's really all it takes is focus, and it becomes a force of nature.
Exactly.
This is actually a pretty good segue into the arts discussion. We would like to give the first half of the show focus on our guest and promote the guest, get to understand what it is you do, your message, etc. And then we want to get your perspective on the arts. So what's your take on the arts, music in our sphere? Can you cite some examples and how they function in our music, our movement? So obviously this is getting a slightly more philosophical, but you have an excellent analytical mind. And you've used your own art, your own animation to create change. So maybe that's a model. But if you could also put a critical eye on, say, the White Art Collective or American Zarathustra or anything that we do, and maybe advise us, for what we could do better.
Well, you have to put yourself, understand that you're a specialist. It doesn't matter whether you're doing podcast. It doesn't matter whether you're doing art. You're basically in an area where the vast majority, if not all of our people, are undergoing psychological warfare constantly 24/7, meaning that the enemy is looking at, we would never do this. We would never look at an advertising for Cheerios and say, you know what, let's make that psychological warfare.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do that, but you have to really start on understanding you're behind enemy lines and you're a specialist. And what you're specializing in doing is getting people from point A to point B. If point A is like, okay, I want them to read this book, or I want them to think this way, or in my opinion, let me give you self-referential. Let's get self-referential. I want them to use anti-race as a code word for anti-white. And I want all these people to be broadcasting this out so that we ingrain the word anti-white into the mainstream again. We want this word used again. It has been used since the 60s. We want it used right now. It was used. It just hadn't been used. And we wanted that out there. And okay, this is what I signed up for. This is what we're going to do. And so as a specialist, you want to get from point A to point B. And so that's what you got to think in terms of. Now, in terms of, a lot of times in our particular struggle, that's what I say. We don't have a movement. We have a struggle, and it's not going to end. Movements kind of come and go and end. Our struggle isn't. You're dealing with a group, white people, if you will, that aren't racially minded, and that is racial. There's always a pro-white perspective, like from white nationalism 1.0, that, well, they were super racially minded, and then this magical group came along and waved a magic wand and made them less so. No. That, Whitaker had like an FBI file starting at age 15. Bob Whitaker, the guy that put me into business. Wow. And he went on to work at Capitol Hill, military intelligence, so on and so forth, etc. And the reason he had an FBI file is because when segregation was happening, desegregation was happening in the South, he made a claim that it was the first attempt to genocide his race, that's what they were going for, is they were going to do to genocide his race. And that was kind of an extreme position back then because, they're just integrating schools. How far would they go with it? Sure. It has nothing to do with forced integration or forced marriages or anything like that. But, that's someone that has a natural racial, let's say, race realist mindset. Okay, there was a number of these in the South. Based on circumstances, but at any given time, you're dealing with something in our race that is almost like a specialist, like a Michelangelo. How many Michelangelos or Nikola Teslas are out there? Well, Western civilization rotates around these specialists in any particular category, whether it be art or anything else. So you have to understand that the vast majority of whites you're talking to or want to talk to aren't going to be all that aware. They're just coming. So you have to be looking to bring awareness as a specialist to get from point A to point B. And at the same time, you have to recognize that is one of their racial traits. And don't be under the fantasy that, well, they're just asleep because this magical group waved a wand. No, that just makes our job more difficult because they're not racially minded to begin with. If they were, this would have never happened. True. My race typically obeys the law. So if the laws are segregation, they obey that. If the laws desegregation, they obey that. If the laws, you got to go fight the Indians or fight this group, they're going to go do that. Yeah. And so you have to understand what you're dealing with here and understand that when we say race is real and it matters, it is. But a lot of times you're dealing with these specialists that are ethnocentric that say, well, the reason these people aren't ethnocentric like me is because a group waved a magic wand, and that group does wave a magic wand. Hollywood does do that. They're not having to do a whole lot. If you really look at the big picture of things, other than make movies and push for decades, but at the same time, those specialists all end up, let's say, skinheads. And then they're walking around and they're producing music for other skinheads. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Is that really as effective as it could be? And then once in a while, one of these skinheads stumbles on a particular song that ends up making out into the general public, right? So I think one of the things you have to do as a specialist is you have to understand, is this song for my particular group or is it for the masses? Okay, because you see, the first podcast I did was for a particular group. Yeah. But the animations I do I think most people that see Anti-Racist Hitler could agree, even way back in the day, and this is why it was designed that way. Well, they could play this anywhere and it would have a tremendous effect on the whites watching it. Well, that's what I'm doing. And so I think that's something you guys have to really think about, because a lot of times it happened in Skinhead, and that's where they made the big impact was music, but they made the big impact in music that wasn't just for their group. Every once in a while you get an artist like, well, you know what? Music transcends just this little group we're here right now.
Yeah.
Let's do something for the biggest white audience I can really speak to. Something for the white normal, which is as big as you can get,
Sure. So I'm reflecting on that now, and I'd like to get Nullis's reflection as well. But I'm looking at myself and saying, who are my songs for? And I serve our movement. I serve the people within our movement, because we are so few with such a heavy, huge responsibility and huge load. And I feel that it can be very blackpilling. It can be very crushing.
Oh, yeah.
So I sing songs to my people, the people in the chat, the people that visit our shows, et cetera, to say we are a people, we are a struggle, we are a cause, we will win, and to dig down into that Western biospirit and pull out the sun, and pull out the galaxies of energy that we have inside to forge forward, see ourselves as just kind of passing the torch in a history, in a lineage of the greatness of our people. So, this is just me kind of going off here, but,
No, I'm not putting you guys on the spot. Listen, this is how it developed for skinhead culture. I'm just simply pointing something out. Be conscious of the fact, and this is not a bad thing, be conscious of the fact that some of the music you're creating and some of the musicians are going to be speaking and motivating the group, which is totally good. It's totally a good thing. Let me tell you, when we brought out Anti-Racist Hitler, it was very motivating for our group, but I wasn't trying to. They already know the score. Yeah. And that does work. You'll find something that goes big, and it'll be maybe by accident. Maybe it's accidental in the artistic process. But at the same time, one thing we noticed over and over again with groups is they tend to preach to the choir. And with music, you have something that can reach massive numbers of people. The high riffs and just maybe a song you're doing or whatever. Nullis, I don't know if Nullis does music. There's so many musicians out there associated with White Art Collective and so many artists. You don't know what you're going to do, but think in terms of, would all right, if they played this song on what would they think if they played this song on country radio today? Whatever. I played an artist and I can't even remember her name because it's new. I'm looking at the last part of my live stream on Tuesday, and I'm going to start ending the live stream maybe with music from one of your artists.
That'd be great.
I ended it with Made of Glass instrumental by Olivia Key. Now that damn song, let me tell you, it only has 329 views on YouTube. That damn song is huge. It is mainstream. That's something that is phenomenal for someone in our particular struggle to be producing from. And I'm looking at it from a point of mass communication, from use in propaganda, because what our enemy's doing is they're acting as specialists, whether it be art, music, otherwise, to get you from point A to point B. We just aren't interested in their point B, right? So we've got to counteract that by thinking in the same terms. Now they're forcing something on a group of people that aren't really interested in it. The vast majority of white people still move to white areas. That's what's going to happen. We all know the score. But at the same time, we this type of thing will come up in let's say White Art Collective, and we need to recognize it and broadcast it out there. And some of the stuff, some of the stuff maybe I say are just to motivate groups or just because someone's paid for a podcast, whatever. I did a podcast Monday that someone paid for, I want your perspective on one of these books, and so I did that. That's fine. I'll do that. And that's for a very targeted audience, but we need to recognize the difference and understand that both are necessary. And especially if you have something that you think has mass appeal, try to broadcast it out there and everyone pitch in. So that's kind of an example. When I hear something like that, I'm like, oh my God, this is this could be, a trailer for a movie. This could be, this is as good as anything anywhere I've heard.
Right. No, it really sounds like we have to talk a lot more. We need to work more on strategy, because I feel that you're very, very experienced. I love your cut and dry, no nonsense way of approaching things. And the White Art Collective, we're artists, we're musicians, poets, etc. And I think we need more kind of business mind involved in what we do to help it become more legitimate, more powerful, etc. But I do want to hand the mic over to Nullis and give him a shot.
Well, before I even say anything, Tim, I just want to let you know that if you ever catch me singing, you better, get some earplugs or something. I'm not a musician or a singer. I write poetry, which is fairly recent, the past few years. I was motivated by everything that I've been seeing, and so it kind of created this whole thing of just writing poetry. I don't know how good my poetry is. I really don't even know sometimes what I'm writing until I start writing it. And so this is what I also, and I fully agree with you. There's art that's written for us to help us, to motivate us, to keep us going. There's art that has a mass appeal that has to be promoted and pushed out to a broader audience. So structurally speaking, both, and an artist can do both.
Oh, absolutely.
So you can have them write a song or a poem or a story or what have you that appeals to us. You can have them do the same thing for a broader audience, or you can even have a song or a piece of work of art that appeals to both, basically. So anyway, there's really no limit to the way we can create and our creativity. So what I do want to say, though, in this case is I think the White Art Collective is very, very unique in the sense that there are a lot of collaborations going on. And I find that aspect of it very interesting and special because, as I said, I write poems, but a lot of times the musicians, they'll take my poems, my readings, or anything that I do, and they'll put music to it, or they'll reproduce it or fix it or create something brand new, and so I find that aspect also very important in our messaging. I think that what you're saying is absolutely correct. There's different levels of artistic creation. There's something that I personally can identify with, a personal experience that I'm sharing through my art. There's an experience that I feel is in the air that I'd like to share with the broader audience. And then there's straight out propaganda, and there's nothing wrong with any one of these. I think all of them have a purpose and we should acknowledge them for their purpose. So that's pretty much what I just wanted to add to this.
Well, I would say, what you're doing is key because here's the thing for most whites, like me. All right. I went into financial services, but obviously I could be a scriptwriter. maybe at a defense intelligence agency or something, I could write scripts, right? It may not be for the reasons people think, but I could write scripts. I can do that. But I had no experience in that because I didn't grow up in Hollywood. And even if I did, what's the odds of me being able to write a script for those guys, right? Yep. And so there's a lot of whites out there, and I would congratulate White Art Collective. A lot of whites out there are like, look, this is something I'd like to do, something I can do, but I never really had a chance. So when it came down to let's do animations, and Mott was like, I can do this primitive form of animations. I'm better at directing, but I can do it. And we're like, okay, let's write a script. And I'm like, oh, that's something I could do, and we start writing scripts. And, it's kind of like what you did with poetry. Like, I want to do this. And so you start doing it. People find other uses for that. What you're going to find out in a collective is where you're going to have the most impact is when you're impacting those that are going to go on to impact those. I always talk about Plato. Plato is someone that had a lot of impact on a lot of people, but he only had one teacher. It was Parmenides. And Parmenides, or one of his teachers, one of his main teachers, Parmenides only had one student, and that was Plato. Right. So you don't really have to have that many people. And in the White Art Collective, you're going to have people that are influencing other people, like you, Nullis, and that's fine. And that's going to have a chain reaction. Then you're going to have people that, and I'll just pick on one, Hyra, since I had her on the show. I talked to the boss rabbit over White Art Collective, and he says, you got to have on our spokesperson. That was Hyra, so I had her on. She has songs that I could see playing in the top 40 all day long. Right now.
Yep.
And there are others out there too. I'm discovering. They have some of you guys have such weird. I'm trying to think, steak fry or something.
Yeah, he's
and
great.
Even the Great Order. You know, I thought he sounded like Queens of the Stone Age, so I'm a big Queens of the Stone Age fan.
Oh.
And I'm like, you know, you guys have so much talent, so there's going to be some particular, and it's not one or the other, it's all of the above. But you to ultimately to create this, you have to impact those that are going to go on to impact those. Now, it may be that Nullis, piece of poetry, is picked up by young whoever, some young fellow in Tennessee, and he becomes a country superstar off that particular poem. That's fine. That's wonderful. You know, that's part of the process. And that's what we have to look for. We have to want to influence those that are going to go on to influence those. And it is at a micro level. It's not necessarily at a macro level, but that's where it ultimately ends up.
Yeah,
you know, we started with a half dozen pushing out memes, and Red Ice, the biggest podcast ever been on was the War on Whites with Red Ice. And that was before Red Ice really came on. That was when they were starting to come into our sphere. And then Why Diversity is a Lie. And those podcasts did a whole lot of work for those particular memes. And that's a hat off to Red Ice. But at the same time, you know, you really want to think in terms of you're a specialist and, you know, you're just going in a particular direction. And you have to think in terms of, you're just going to have a small influence, but that'll mushroom out. You want that tidal wave effect, and it starts with ripples.
Yeah, and it's also a combination of humility and confidence, if that makes any sense. You have to sort of have the humility to understand that you're trying to just be yourself, do what you do, and you hope that you inspire one person who might be better than you are. But you should also have the confidence in saying, I'm going to stand out and I'm going to do this. So I think that both of those are important characteristics for an artist.
I always say to be an activist of any kind, you have to look at the universe with a great deal of humility, and you've got to act with total arrogance. Then you got to go back to looking at the universe with a great deal of humility because you don't know everything. And then you have to act with total arrogance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I feel like the White Art Collective is doing these things kind of with just naturally or organically, but I advocate for more planning, more strategy, more of these kinds of discussions where, you know.
Well, I don't know that you need you see, here's the thing. A lot of times in our particular struggle, and I can go back from 95 to, let's say, 2009, I've read so many strategy plans and so many bulletins and templates and 30-point plans. I just went in a direction. And let that organically grow like an amoeba. You know how amoebas grow? They just kind of organically expand. I would continue doing what you're doing with White Art Collective. I wouldn't be too big-brained about anything. I would just keep going in that particular direction. I think you'll naturally do that.
Okay.
I wouldn't be too, if you ever want to talk about anything specific, you can pick my brain. I've seen it all twice, maybe 3 times on any given day. But, if you have a lot of artists around, at one time, having artists to collaborate with is tremendous thing. Right now I have a 10-year anniversary t-shirt I could give out designs for. I have intro stuff. I have a whole list of stuff that I can give out to artists. And I only have one artist who's buried and really can't do any, there's only so much one guy can do or gal can do because it's so much friggin' work just to do a song and just to engineer a song or just to draw a particular photo or draw a particular picture. So this is a lot of work. So I think what you guys are doing is, one thing that I've seen over the years is that an activist will get involved and they'll get involved in a way that isn't sustainable for their lifestyle. And you have to be involved in a way that is sustainable for you, for your lifestyle. So even if someone, let's say you have some incredible artist and she's pregnant, well, she might not be able to do as much, but yet the White Art Collective, she can still participate. And once she has the kid, you know what I'm saying? Once she has the baby. So you have to have that type of structure there. And that's what you guys have that I've never seen before. And that's a good thing where someone could come and go like, well, I've got too many projects. I can't do any art now, but in 6 months from now, I can work with you guys again. And that's really what you need. You probably need 1,000 artists doing that, but I'm sure you'll be there one day.
Well, just having accomplished the White Art Collective Music Festival in real life, which we've been celebrating that and enjoying the afterglow of that. I'm sure that of course I know Hirath talked about that on your show. That I think was a giant accomplishment, and then we'll build on that. People see what we've accomplished, and then the next time that comes around, more people can be involved, etc. So every accomplishment of that nature, I think it builds the momentum, and then it just shows people that we're growing, and people want to be a part of something. I always say that nobody loves you until somebody loves you. Like you have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you really,
yeah.
One of the things that I will tell you is that, a lot of times our particular struggle, various different groups have attracted the wrong kind of people. They want actions. They want this type of action or that type of action. What we concentrated on is attracting people that we would want to attract other people. And that's something you guys are doing quite well inadvertently, because look, what I do isn't for everybody. We would say, look, if you want to do what we're doing, we're just spreading memes online, and we're doing this, and you can participate in animations, or you could do your own. I mean, there's other animators out there within that particular sphere as well.
Sure.
At the time, you could do videos, you can do anything. This is the message we're working with, and there was a certain discipline within that message and staying within that message that became very difficult at first. Very difficult at first, but then became very rewarding to see it out there and to understand that, well, this is kind of what media does. Media, we have this in mind that media, and even unfortunately with musicians, that they just do what they want to do. Well, a lot of them do what they have to do, and then they do what they want to do. If you have a message to work with and you're producing a film and they're like, well, you got to put this here and this here. Like our enemy does this all the time. This is your imagery here, and this is your imagery here, and this is, the script we want you to write. This is something that our side, typically, historically, the activists just do whatever the hell they want to do. And so what this was for us was a tremendous amount of discipline. And this is what messaging is about. This is what media is really about. And this is what it takes to transform a society, because this is what was done to us. And this is what we have to learn. You're not just going to sit down and, I want to do whatever I want to do. Well, this is what needs to be done. This is what has to be done. And this is, this is a totally different mindset.
That plugs directly into what I was saying before about the artists all working on something or having some level of planning, not to the point where it kills the art, because the nature of art is that we have to emote it in our own way, privately and personally. That wouldn't be art, right, if we didn't do that.
Sure.
But at the same time, I feel like each one of us is kind of like, I don't know what the word is, but where each one of us is a sun. And if we put all the suns together, that it would be like a super sun, and the light and the effect would be so much bigger if we could just have a mission that was a little clearer.
Well, the way you might want to, I think their mission is, connecting artists, bringing artists into a collective is fine. I think I wouldn't get too complicated. What you may want to do is have various different themes for various different projects and make the artist stick within those themes and have very defined themes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, well, this is our particular theme, and this particular theme could be, you gave me one you were working with in your music from Jason Kuna's work, No White Guilt, and one of his particular sayings, and you could have a collection of those, like, that all go together, or maybe a short poem by Nullis that's maybe no more than a paragraph, no more than 200 words. It's like, well, here's your inspiration, stick to this particular theme.
Exactly.
That's something you can do and force discipline on the group regarding messaging. Okay, if you're going to write a song, this is your influence here. What are you going to write? And that's something that I think our side has to learn more of, because if you're in the media, you're not going to, a lot of times there's going to be messages that you have to get out to our people. Right. Even if you run Fox News, and you're not going to be saying whatever you want to say. You can work that in. Someone good on message can work in whatever they want to work in, but this is something that's a discipline that I think, and there's a time to be, total artistic expression all over the place. And there's a time to be very focused, and you guys can enforce that discipline in the group with various different themes, or you could have a contest around themes, or, that's something you could do.
Sure. Yeah, and there's also the aspect of what the artist does within the collective, and then what the artist does outside of the collective. So there's also a differentiation in that sense. So an artist can be both associated with the White Art Collective, and when they're associated with the White Art Collective, they work within that theme. Yeah. And then if they're outside of the White Art Collective, then they do whatever it is that they do. I think that there's nothing wrong with that either.
No. No, not at all. Well, I mean, I'm a financial accountant. I know how to read balance sheets and stuff like that. So that tells you something.
Well,
So most of our race are really they're basically in the wrong occupation, is what you come to the conclusion of. I don't care whether you're in Hungary, Poland, Germany, United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, you're most likely, not 100%, you could be a farmer that, well, I would have been a farmer anyways because my dad was a farmer, or you could be in some particular skilled trade that your dad was in. And that's very common. You know, you do what your dad did and you learned construction from your father. But a lot of us are in occupations based on, like I was in financial services. I'm going to talk about this for a second. This is kind of obvious. When my grandfather was alive, financial services was, when he was a boy, financial services was like, 4 or 6% of the economy. Now it's like, it's like 45%. So that is a grotesque skew. And so you have a lot of whites out there getting back to the basics, getting back to what do they want to do? What do they feel inspired? What should they be doing?
Yeah. It's a huge discussion. I think we got a really, really good start on it, and definitely something for people in the White Art Collective to think about. Artists are extremely independent, but yet our mission binds us together. So it'll be interesting to see where the conversation goes from here within the collective. So before we enter the discussion on Imperium art and get your response to Nolis's ideas in the essay, I want to quickly mention that I am actually auctioning off the back cover to the current White People's Quarterly, which I painted. That's the bidding's at $300 right now. If anybody's interested in that, please contact me on my Twitter or anywhere, really. You can just contact me to bid on that. But I did want to go ahead and segue into the Imperium art discussion. So, Tim, what were your thoughts about Nolis's essay and the general project and what we're doing?
My thoughts was, this is a big brain guy I'm going on with. Holy cow. He writes an essay about Imperium art. Now,
it's amazing.
I thought to myself, is this guy drawing paintings? Is he writing musics? And I didn't realize at the time, I had no idea that you were a poet. So now that I'm on with the Hungarian version of Edgar Allan Poe, the budding Edgar Allan Poe, I thought it was very big brained. I was pretty impressed that some people are really motivated by that. Some people have to really have a lot of philosophy and write that down and write their plan down before they do something. I'm not necessarily one of those types, but I thought it was very thorough, very complete. And I thought it was like, well, this is really going to inspire someone if they read that. Look at these guys. They have an actual treatise to Imperium art. Oh my God. So I think it's good to have stuff like that around. Yeah, I was a bit overwhelmed because normally this is the first show I've been on. It was like, here, you're going to read this 11-page essay. I don't think it was like 11-page. And then you're going to comment on it like, what? It's the first time that happened. So I think it's a good thing. And now that I know you're a poet, I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult because we were addressing a topic that essentially didn't exist before. I mean,
I tweeted out the link with I'm discussing art as war. So. So, when we put out AntiRacist Hitler, one of the things that we started looking, even with How Whites Took Over America Part 1 and the videos we were producing and stuff like that, isn't so much, there's a totally different way of looking at propaganda. And this is something I learned from Whitaker. When you start talking about propaganda as psychological warfare, what our enemy's not going to do, they're not going to say, well, how do we view this? They're going to say, how do whites view this? How are they viewing this? How can we tweak it for them? And so when we put out AntiRacist Hitler, the silence among our enemy, that's what Whitaker was looking for. He was looking, what are they going to say? What are they going to do? Because that's really who you're speaking to as well. In some particular piece, you're going to find out some of the most effective music you have out. And you don't, thinking in this terms is learned. It's totally alien, I think, to humans thinking in terms of psychological warfare. Because see, this position we're in because of poor decision making. But we were put in an environment where poor decision making almost becomes inevitable, and that's the goal of psychological warfare: is to put you in an environment where you can't make good decisions. And if you can put an enemy in that environment, you don't have to beat them; they beat themselves.
Exactly.
And what we're looking to do is the direct opposite. But inadvertently, by doing that, you have to recognize that sometimes, like when I'm looking at music, I'm not looking at your music like, well, this I love this. That's true, but I'm also stepping back and putting on the Whitaker hat because he was trained at a professional level in this. How is the enemy going to hear it? What if I blast that? What if this gets played on the radio? How would the enemy? They would freak out over some of this stuff. And, it's like anti-racist Hitler, one could only imagine if you were the enemy sitting at, let's say, the fact that we could get that done is one thing. The fact that it's that good is another thing. The fact that the messaging is that concise is another thing. It pretty much, says it all. And that's what I'm looking at with your music is like, they're going to look at this stuff. They're going to be like, damn, that's a tough one. And you've got so many artists putting out this stuff. I mean, this other one, what's Steak Fry? Steak Fry?
There's so many.
There are so many. There's some really ones that really, I keep saying, well, that could be, you could play this on the radio. You could play this here. And, I'm thinking in terms of, what would the enemy do when they hear this? Like, oh my God.
That's interesting that you mentioned this. And I think that this episode is exceptional for this purpose. I mean, outside of everything else, but for this specific purpose, that in the Imperium art essay, I did not really address how the enemy will react to what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that element of Imperium art is perfectly represented by this episode. So I think that because what I focused on was more the internal contextualization, the understanding of the community, the understanding of yourself in this culture war or in this culture insurgency, as I write it in the essay.
Counterinsurgency.
Yeah. And so your input, I think, is extremely valuable in understanding the propaganda aspect of it, the communication, the messaging aspect of it, and also understanding that what we do not only impacts us or the broader audience that we wish to target, but it also impacts the enemy. And I think that that's an extremely important aspect that I didn't cover.
It is demoralizing. Art is demoralizing to us, and it's demoralizing to our enemy. So what you want to do is you just, how when you're a kid, or maybe when you're not a kid, you've been hitting the solar plexus right in the center, and it takes your breath away. That's what you want every piece. Yep. This is what an artist really wants. You're trying to convey a message that you just want to affect one person that's going to go on to affect a lot of people. You want to Parmenides it. You want to affect the Plato, right? That's all you need is one listener that's a Plato that ends up being an amazing musician, right? That's all you need.
Exactly.
But you want to do that at the same time. You really want to think in terms of, how is the enemy going to view this? I mean, is this really going to set them off? And that's fine to say, well, no, my group is going to uplift my group. That's great. But if you can hit the enemy in the solar plexus and you listen for the silence, I remember when that came out. Now we didn't know how they reacted, but we knew when IMBD, the Hollywood directory, put me in it for that. They put my full name, Timothy Gallagher Murdock. My middle name's a last name, which is a funny story behind it. But so my whole entire name in there as the producer, and, writer, and stuff like that. It was just kind of funny. Wow. So they got the message.
Art obviously works on a sort of a psychological and spiritual level. It's transformative, and I think it. I don't know how to explain it, but
when I think of art as war, that's what I thought of. To make a long story short, I went on a tangent when I was reading the Imperium, and you talk about art as war, and that's this type of thing. Imperium as war, Imperium art as war. I was thinking in terms of psychological warfare. And how not necessarily like, okay, I'm waging war on children. We don't do that, but we're looking to make correct associations. We're looking to do it in a way that's extraordinary, beautiful, impactful, and in a way when the enemy sees it, they're going to be like, what? This person's openly pro-white, to this person's, what do you call white positive? That's the big kahuna calls it. So this is what we want. The only thing I would encourage more of is more creative titling. I think sometimes titling is somewhat predictable in the whether it be a skinhead song or a pro-white song. The titling is somewhat predictable, and I think the music is so good that a lot of the title, and I'm not talking 100%. I haven't seen 100% out there, but I think that's something historically. I think that we could do less predictable titling, more dramatic titling of songs.
Okay.
Yeah, fully agree with that.
Well, the point I was trying to make before was that art is hard to attack. If two people, say, arguing online or whatever, you've got dialectic, you have, the straw man arguments, you've got gaslighting, you've got all this stuff that the common person doesn't have the tools with which to fight that war. Whereas in the arts, they don't have any tools to dismantle my song or Nullis's poetry or et cetera, et cetera. It's like a kind of a martial art, if you will, where our enemies don't have anything. Of course, they make their degenerate Netflix series and all that garbage, but they can't undo what we do, though. That's what I'm trying to say. So there's a real power to this. And I think this is an important takeaway from what we're talking about here, because you're talking about what does the enemy think? How do they act or react to this? And should we have some preemptive strategy for that, or is the art strong enough to stand on its own?
Oh, it's strong enough to stand on its own. I think more creative titling, and I can't think of any specific example. I can think of something that's my historic criticism of, let's say, music from our sphere, and this is going back, 30 years, is that they could do, more creative titling, and some people probably are already doing that. What you want to do is you want to hit this type of system doesn't die from David and Goliath like scenarios. It dies from 1,000 little cuts.
Right.
The Soviet Union came down from 1,000 little cuts brought out by the samizdat and just people poking it over and over again. And that's what you want to inspire. Okay. So you want as many as possible doing as great a stuff as possible, as most over the top, amazing looking art or amazing looking videos or amazing whatever, just high production quality, as good as you can get, amazing songs,
Strive toward excellence. That's always the tagline, right? We should always
shoot for the moon. Shoot for the moon.
Yep.
Beautifully said. This was a really, really brilliant conversation. Very high energy, very insightful, and definitely a kind of a new bar for Imperium art with what you brought to the conversation. So we're very, very grateful to have you on, and we hope to continue this dialogue with you. I think that. Sure. What we have and what you have must go together, that we've got to connect more. And yes. I think that the end result is going to be exponential. So are there any closing thoughts? Could you tell people where they can find you?
No, I would just congratulate you guys on doing something. A lot of times historically when people write treatises and stuff like that, they don't take action, and you have to take some type of consistent action. And if it's a poet, write poetry is often, or short stories or music or whatever it is you do, do it. Take action. And if you're not happy, like, look, I want to be a musician and I'm not really happy with what I'm doing here, but I've never really had an opportunity because I don't have the connections. Well, you can get involved with White Art Collective. That's what they're there for.
Exactly.
And that it fulfills a need. If you're fulfilling a need, you're going to be A-okay. I don't really have anything to add other than I would congratulate you guys on what you're doing, and I just keep moving forward.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you very much.
The White Art Collective is extremely gracious and loving and open to new artists, creators of any kind. If you're out there and you're working on whatever your craft is, but you don't feel like you're ready, still give us a shout out. Contact us on Twitter, wherever, anywhere, and get in touch. We will mentor people. We're really trying to grow, and we are growing exponentially. So if you don't think you're quite ready, that's okay. Still get into the fold. And then throughout time, we're going to encourage you. And we're, like we say, art is war, and you're our soldier. So come and join. Anyway, once again, Tim, it's been fabulous having you on Imperium Art. Please, people, do check the link in the show notes. I'll have his site there, White Rabbit Radio. Also, once again, I'm auctioning my art for right now it's at 300. Contact me if you'd like to get that. There'll be a lot more art auctions coming down the road here. And thank you again, Nullis, for all that you do, both on my show and on the White Art Collective. Nullis, when will Conversations with the Wind be starting up again?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Tim, for being on this episode with us. It was an honor, and I hope that we were able to inspire others during this episode. My podcast, my poetry cast, Conversations with the Wind, will commence its season 3. Will commence toward the end of October, early November. And thank you very much, Donald.
Oh, certainly. All right, gang. So tune in next week and the week after, and keep following us with what we're doing here on Imperium Art, but also whiteartcollective.com. You got to get yourself hooked up with the RSS feed there. It's essentially a news aggregate. Anything and everything that's happening with all of our creators is published there, so you can stay on top of our cultural growth. So once again, Tim, thank you, and thank you to the audience. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
It was my pleasure, and you guys, it'll be great to keep in touch with you and to watch this grow even more.
Thanks you. Okay, have a good one.
Cheers.